Agile for Humans, Episode 6.
Processes and tools dominate today's Agile discussions, but we are devoted to the individuals and interactions that make it work. From the beginner to the veteran practitioner, we have something for you. Welcome to Agile for Humans.
Welcome to this week's edition of Agile for Humans. Very excited this week, Amitai. And yes, by the way, Amitai is here back again with me. We're going to talk through a bunch of topics, but I'm bursting with excitement. Can you guess why? I'll tell you because you'll never guess this.
I was going to try to guess really slowly, but okay.
No. So I just went out to Leibson, which is where we host this podcast, and I was looking at our statistics. So we've got 4 episodes out. Number 5 just went out tonight on No Estimates. Already huge downloads on the No Estimates episode, and it's only been live for about 40 minutes. So I'm really impressed with that, real happy. But guess what? We've gone past 1,000 downloads with just 3 episodes.
No kidding.
We blew right past it.
That's a pretty good number.
Well, we're not even just a little bit over 1,000. Blew past that number. Episodes 4 and 5 are dumping onto that statistic and just making it even better. It's just really exciting to see the thing that we've put together is actually gaining a little traction and seems to be, a little bit popular with our audience.
It makes sense that it would be because we've gotten really good people to talk to and we've had some really good conversations. So it's not surprising that those people bring some of their audiences with them, and it's, lucky for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been very blessed with the caliber of guests we've been able to get on here, and a lot of people that have been very giving with their time. So that's been great. To quote Joy Inc., as we were talking about Richard Sheridan in that book a little bit earlier, it's a joyful moment for me. It's really great to see. So thank you to everyone out there listening right now who's made this possible, who's listened, who's spread the word about the podcast, who's provided reviews. Everyone out there that's helping make this podcast successful, I can't thank you enough, and we're just so appreciative that you're here, that you're listening, and that you're also participating. Yeah,
that's exactly the thing. If there's more you want to hear about, or people you want to hear from, or topics you want us to talk about, we'd love to know what that is. We'll do our best.
Absolutely. And speaking of topics, I think you've put together quite a few little ideas here that we can jump into. I've got a few things I want to get into, but first and foremost, you did one of the neatest classes I think I've read about, and I wanted to pick your brain on it for a little bit. I don't want you to, no spoilers here, because there's some pieces of this class that are kind of proprietary or that you need to go through that you should experience and not be told about. But the problem-solving leadership course with Jerry Weinberg and Esther Derby, very interesting class. Seems like it had an interesting effect on you. Just what are your thoughts on that? How'd it go? And let's dig into it a bit.
Wow. So first things first, it was a couple weeks ago now. And what I had been prepared for from other folks who had attended and told me about it is that you may not realize everything that you learned from it for years. You may, years will go by and you'll keep encountering situations where something that you acquired during problem-solving leadership turns out to be a learning that you have in your head that you can apply. And the way you discover it is by being in those situations. So in other words, when I come out of that workshop just dead tired, exhausted, not sure what I learned, that doesn't mean that I didn't. It just means that I don't know yet. And I can look forward to discovering as I go along what I came away with. What I have is a couple guesses about what that might be. First of all, if I had gone much earlier in my career, I would have had no business being there. Just the kind of learning environment that it was and the kind of awareness that it requires. I didn't have those things, and I wouldn't have been equipped to learn from those situations. It just would have been pressure and no benefit. And had I come, I think, later in my career than now, I'm really not sure what I would have taken away. And so I feel like I'm in a kind of a middle range where I'm not sure what to expect because I didn't see a lot different about myself or about the ways that I behave that I'm aware of. So I'm not sure what the takeaway is. What I can say is that absolutely hands down, it was extremely well run. There were very high caliber people there that I'm very happy that I met, Esther and Jerry among them, that it reinforced for me. I don't know if it's learning or if it's reinforcement. It's something that I've always valued. There is a distinction between being in the problem, observing how the problem is being solved, and designing how the problem can be solved. And usually when I'm thinking at these multiple levels and moving between them, because each of them validates or invalidates the other, and also, rejiggers the whole lay of the land so you can solve the problem. Usually when I'm thinking in that way, I'm not being joined in that kind of thinking by the people around me. It's rare that I've worked with people who do that as well. And at problem-solving leadership, that was not only a behavior that was shared by a lot of my fellow attendees, it was a behavior that was modeled repeatedly and consistently by Esther and Jerry, that there's solving the problem, there's designing a problem, and there's designing an environment in which to solve the problem. And these are all things that as managers or leaders or consultants or people who are trying to solve problems, we would do better if we master them. So it was a reinforcement for me because it's a behavior that I like to have. And it was pretty enjoyable to see expert application of it that wasn't me.
So it sounds like it's definitely 2 thumbs up for that class. It's a class I hope I'm able to take, maybe not this year, but perhaps next, and get into and learn some of those mental models. And I'm especially intrigued by the idea of creating problems as a means to solve problems. That seems like it's one of those meta concepts that I'm sure it's more concrete when you're doing the exercises, but it's just something that's always caught my attention. I've always thought, wow, do I really want to pose problems to people in order to solve other problems?
Yeah, it's more about designing problems for the people that you want to solve. So it's to do with delegation. Instead of giving any problem as it exists right now, think about what it would take to solve it for the people that you're trying to give it to. And is that a nice, amenable environment for them, or do you need to design it a little bit differently before you hand it off? So I'm sure that you have a ton of experience with that in your role, and you would bring a lot of practical insight as an attendee, and maybe would have some immediate takeaways if you were to take a class like that.
Yeah, it just seems like it's all around intentional leadership. It's not just delegating or handing out tasks. It's really looking that next step forward and saying, is this going to lead to a positive outcome, or do I need to re-slant this problem just a little bit and add a different perspective to make sure it resolves in a more logical or a more enjoyable way? So, yeah, I'm definitely intrigued by it. I'm encouraged by your positive comments on it and by George's recommendation. And it just sounds like a great thing. We'll put a link in the show notes to the class. I think they're running another one in September, but it certainly sounded like a neat experience. Another experience you tweeted about that I was following anxiously, I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't make it to this conference, was Agile Roots. Seems like you had an excellent experience there. Actually got to give a few talks, I believe, and maybe you can go into those for us. And I would love to hear about how your talks went. I know you partnered with Lisa Crispin on at least one of them, and from the sounds of the tweets, or from reading the tweets, it looks like you guys just nailed it, and it seems like everyone involved was happy. So how did that go? And help me or make me feel a little bad or even worse about missing Agile Roots as you discuss it.
I can do that very quickly. I loved Agile Roots. I've never felt so included at every turn and so comfortable at any conference that I've been to. Part of that is to do with the way that I found out about it, which is that Alan Daly, who was also consulting in Columbus when I first started at this job and was in Columbus, we had dinner, we got to know each other a little bit. And a bit later on, he pointed out that, hey, Agile Roots seems like the kind of conference that you in particular would enjoy. He had been to it, and he thought that I should know about it. So it was kind of on my radar as a personalized recommendation. Then it came to pass that Lisa had put out a call on Twitter for anybody who's fairly new to conference speaking. If they'd like a pair, she's open to it. And I am fairly new to conference speaking. At the time, I had known her a little bit from a little bit of pairing that we'd done on a program she was working on. And so I guess she knew what she was getting into when she offered me in particular. And so we were putting together a workshop, which is nothing that I have a lot of experience with, but she does. She's run many workshops. She knows how to facilitate. And she's already an invited speaker at Agile Roots. So I felt like I'm in good hands putting together a proposal with this person. If it's accepted, I'm in good hands running this workshop with this person. And so already, even before I was ever accepted, I felt like this is a conference that somebody said I should care about, and somebody who really knows what they're doing is helping me put a proposal together. I already am feeling comfortable. And then, it was accepted, and the experience report that I submitted was also accepted. Not a lot of people who were speakers there gave more than one talk. I'm one of the few that did. So it feels like a special honor on top of the fact that if you walk into that speaker room, those are some really well-known, really bright, really articulate, and just nice people to talk to. Just to be in that group in any way, to be accepted into it, and then to be there and participate in it as a full member. I felt so welcomed and so included. And the conference isn't huge. It's a couple hundred people attending, not a ton of vendors. The conference space feels like if you designed a conference space to feel like a mansion where there's stairs in strange places and a few different floors and rooms of different shapes. But it's kind of like a mansion, but it's really a conference center. Just the scale was right. The family feeling was extremely welcoming. And I'm just honored to have been included, and it's the best conference experience I've had so far.
And now I really hate missing it. So
it works. I knew I could do it.
You did it. No, it was great. Yeah, I saw it earlier in the year, and I looked at it, and I weighed up a few different ones, and I thought, I've already booked a few, and now I'm just kicking myself for missing it because it looks like it was just amazing. Actually saw Pat Maddox tweet out earlier today that over 40% of the tickets were sold before they announced a single speaker, which to me, and I think he noted this too, means that, wow, they really have something special there. If people are willing to put down their cash without even knowing who's speaking, it just must be such an excellent culture that they're willing to show up and network and be with people even without knowing exactly what they're in for as far as sessions go.
That was another highlight of Agile Roots for me, is that I got to meet Pat in person. Pat's done a lot for me in my career, and he knows it, and I got to thank him in person. And it was a real treat to get to hang out with him a little bit.
It's interesting. I had the same experience out in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. I was speaking out at the Agile Development Conference. The BSC ADC was the hashtag for that. It's TechWell. It's their Better Software Conference West. And I got to meet up with Bob Galen, who joined us a few episodes ago, and meet him in person, had a nice lunch with him, had multiple conversations. And as it turned out, from a scheduling perspective, my talk was the last one of the last day. So I'm the last talk that's going to happen at the conference. And so Bob ended up coming to that talk. So you have one of your Agile heroes sitting in the back row. So that added a little pressure. And then Chris Sims, another well-known Scrum trainer, author, great thinker in the community, wandered in and joined Bob in the back. So I've got two of the more advanced thinkers in our community sitting in the back listening to this talk. But it was a great experience because they joined in and we were able to collaborate a bit and talk to Chris and Bob afterwards. And it's just neat to be able to meet some of these people that you talk to on Twitter, you read their books, you correspond through email, you go back and forth, and all of a sudden it's living, breathing people, and you're having just a great time as if you've known each other for years, sitting back and talking, and just a really neat experience that I think this social media has brought to our world. We've met once in person. We talk constantly online through Twitter and Skype and all these conversations, and it feels like we can just sit back and have these conversations as if we've known each other for years, and it's really just been a few months, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's just one of those neat dynamics that's new to me, going on this conference circuit and meeting some of the people that I've talked to for years on Twitter face to face. And so that was a lot of fun, a similar experience, I think, to what you had at Agile Roots. But also, even out in Vegas, that conference experience was just excellent. So TechWell puts on a good show. It's a little bigger than Agile Roots, and it's a different type of community, I think. It's more geared towards the vendors. There's a lot of tool vendors out there. There's a lot of, IBM's got a booth, and so there's a lot of the big players. But it also has, some of the that has the Bob Galens and the Chris Sims who show up and who are just down to earth and great. And it just has that smallish feel, but there's a lot of people there. So it was a really nice environment and really well done. And just, again, like you were saying, it's just an honor to be able to go to those events and speak at them, because this is, like you, my first year going around and speaking at these conferences and having these high-end people accept you and talk to you and go through these talks with you and then give great feedback afterwards. It's just very validating. So I think we're having very similar experiences down different tracks, and it's really just joyful. It really fills me up. Zach Bonacker and I were talking about this. Again, I keep referencing past episodes, but he was saying that he'll hear these stories that fills his tank. And I'll tell you what, those moments just fill up the tank, and it gets you through some of those low points. And it's certainly been, and I think for both of us, a series of high points lately.
It definitely has. Speaking of feedback that you got on your talk, we got a very interesting piece of feedback, Lisa and I, on the workshop that we did, which was called DevOps Dojo. I don't really know the first thing about DevOps in practice. I just know that I've been a sysadmin, I've been a developer. I try to exercise empathy in designing, one tool for the other to use and vice versa. But what I do know about DevOps is, nothing in particular about Docker or what have you, but that working together works better. And working together was the theme of Agile Roots this year. So what we put together was this exercise with really an artificial restriction, where we had this program that was dev, and we had this production process that was ops, and it was printing address labels. So you run this program, you give it a data file of CSV, and it's supposed to print labels that we could send out catalogs to the people that want to buy our products. And the artificial restriction is that dev writes the program with an initial set of data, and then ops has to run it in production with a slightly updated data file that is a little bit more complicated all of a sudden than the code can handle. So the label will come out wrong, or won't print right or something. And so we go through a couple iterations where we force dev and ops not to share what they know, not to share the data, not to share the code, and try it before they go to production, but to screw it up in production because they weren't working together. And that turns out to be just enough exercise to get people really talking about how not artificial this experience is, and that it's exactly like things they've really experienced. And we heard a lot of stories, and I told the story as well. And then we let them, for the last iteration, work together. This wasn't even really a programming exercise. We encouraged people who were ops to be the dev and who were dev to be the ops. And when they would make a change to the code, it was basically a one-line change that I had pre-cooked for them and I put on the projector. So the point was, go through the exercise, be frustrated by it, let's talk about it, now let's work together better. And at the end, Lisa facilitated a brainstorming session where we came up with a bunch of ideas that we could take back to our workplaces about working better together, that were not limited to dev and ops. It worked just as well for the idea of testers and devs, really anyone, BAs, POs, everybody can work together better. And I'm hoping that she will write that up soon. I'm looking forward to her blog post about it.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you just reach across the org. And that seems to be a common, at least theme lately in a lot of talks and posts that I've been reading. And maybe I'm causing that through my own searches, but it just seems like the more we're able to break through those silos, reach across the org, and work with the different groups, the better the outcomes. And that seems so basic. It's common sense, right? But when you go to work the next day, it's like, well, you got to work with the DevOps team, or nope, you got to go to web hosting, nope, security's got to be over here. And it's all these silos of people through these gated checks that you're working through. And it's like, no, wait a minute. Why aren't we tearing this down, pairing up, and getting through this quicker? And it's a basic thing. It's a common sense thing. But in all practice, you may as well be on Mars trying to pull it off.
Maybe it isn't common sense. It seems like it should be, but if it were, then we wouldn't be talking about it. We just obviously do it. It seems to take an uncommon kind of sense to point out that the fiefdoms that we've constructed and the boundaries that we've placed around ourselves might be hurting us, even though some people who are playing this game are trying to consolidate power. That's not what everybody in the game is trying to do, and at least in theory, that's not what the organization is trying to do. So maybe it's pretty uncommon after all, and that's why nobody does it.
But I think people wrap around in their justifications for these silos that they can control things better, they have better visibility, it's easier to manage. There's all these things that in management we tell ourselves that, no, this is the right thing because I can ensure outcomes are better. And it's wrong-minded. I mean, it's an illusion of control that we fight through, whether it's estimates or silos or whatever it is we're doing. It's this illusion that we can will an outcome to happen, as opposed to, well, the alternative is trust, right? We build up silos and process so we don't have to trust. The alternative is we have to trust intelligent people to do the right thing. And that's the part, and that's, to me, is a smell. When you see the silos, you see the processes that are very heavy, and you don't see people standing up over the cubicle wall and talking. There's something going on there, that there's a lack of trust or another related issue that is causing that kind of behavior. Does that resonate with you at all?
It does. And trust is expensive and risky. It's just that it might be less expensive and risky than the other strategies. But people in corporate environments typically have modeled for them untrusting kind of behavior. And on the occasions that you see trusting kind of behavior, every now and then you see someone get burned by it in a way that's pretty painful. And so even if people are open and trusting in their personal lives, they have this other context that business is different, and it doesn't pay off to be open and trusting in business. And you have to guard yourself and defend yourself because somebody, whether they're out to get you or not, they may let you down. And you have to be prepared for that before it happens.
Yeah, it just seems like the behaviors of others create the systems that constrain us.
But the flip side is that every single one of us, as bound as we are by those systems, has the capacity to act outside of them. Right. It's not easy. It's maybe one of the harder things that exists, but we are all free enough, if we see what's going on, to try playing the game a different way.
Yeah, it's neat to hear these ideas. We start with its common sense, but in all practicality, so difficult to pull off. But what I have found and what's consistent across my career is that the more that I've tried to bring people together, the greater success I've enjoyed. And it's just because I've stepped back and decided I can't be smarter than a group. I'm not that bright, right? And there's probably plenty of people listening to this right now going, yes, he's right. He's not that bright. But it's just come down to the realization that I can't get my brain to go past the idea that I'm smarter than the whole group. And so why would I ever work in a way that would silo them off and that would create fiefdoms of command and control when together we do so many things so much better?
Well, if your goal is, to solve the claimed problem, to produce the claimed outcome, the thing that we're all having meetings about and making backlogs about and making stories about, then yeah, that's the best way. I discovered this the hard way in big organizations. There are a lot of people who are paying lip service to the claimed problem and the claimed outcome, and they're merely using this as a platform to advance themselves, which in a big organization especially is a complicated enough system that the one can be at the expense of the other, maybe has to be. And so here I am naively going along trying to make this a really ordered backlog and follow it really carefully with respect to the priority and negotiate between all these different potential customers that want something from me based on what I think is best for the product and best for the business. And that may be only one of the things that's going on there. Maybe the other thing going on there is these people are jostling for, whoever can get me to do something has acquired some power and influence. And the more power and influence they garner, the further up the org chart they go. And maybe that's what they're doing. And I found in practice that it didn't pay to be naive, which I had originally been, about focusing only on the problem and the thing that people are saying. There was always more going on than that. And if I tried to ignore that, it would come back to bite me. So
it's certainly a factor, and it's one that you have to keep an eye on. But I find, for the most part, that people are benevolent in the workplace, and maybe that's my naivety, and perhaps someday I'm going to get burned by that. But I have found that there are a few kingdom builders out there, but for the most part, we're all trying to feed our kids.
Yeah,
right? And that's
what I learned from that workplace is something that I basically already knew, which is that it was the wrong kind of workplace for me.
right.
And that's why I am where I am now. It also prepared me very well to consult for big companies that can be complicated, but it made extra clear that based on who I am and how much effort it takes me just to be cognizant of that second game, I don't want to be involved in organizations that are doing that. I'm happy to consult for them, and I want to be part of organizations that are for real.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I've certainly worked in toxic environments, and it not only is it just exhausting, but I think it's soul draining as well. You just come out of it a shell of who you were, and there's not enough money in the world that well, maybe there is, but there's not enough money they're willing to pay you that's worth that kind of the years that it takes away from you. You age a lot quicker in those environments. The stress is just insane, and you're absolutely right. Those toxic environments where anything but staying in your box is unhealthy. Just it doesn't work out well.
Well, and I do have to be thankful for that experience. It's something that I touched on at the beginning and end of my experience report at Agile Roots, that being in a situation where I was on a delivery team and leading a delivery team in an environment where it was painful to do that, even when we were doing it really well, and not being appreciated for it and not being recognized for it and having obstacles placed in my way, it gives me a lot of empathy for teams that are in that situation. And it makes it really important for me for a while not to be in that situation. And so that's the way that I felt from that experience. Is I learned a ton about how to coach teams that are stuck in situations like that. And it made me want to coach instead of be on the team. So it has a lot to do with the career change that I made. I have to be thankful for it.
When you have those toxic environments, when you have people that are, and again, in my experience, it's not often, but you do have the people building the kingdoms. I try to include everyone and make the work visible, right? And that typically takes care of most of the issues. It's a great diffuser. I think that there's a saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And in many of the cases on a project, when people are throwing up roadblocks, when things are getting tricky, if you just pull everyone in, include management, include everyone up and down the chain that's willing to participate and say, here's everything, and put it on the wall, it tends to make those activities go away quickly.
I definitely used that technique when I was having trouble deciding what goes above what on the backlog. Somebody brings something in new. They're an executive director, somebody else is a managing director, I'm an associate. And my job as the product owner is to say no, or we'll do that in 2 years, or we'll do that never.
Right.
They don't want to hear that from me. They'll go up the chain. But what often did help was, well, I'll tell you what, here's the backlog. You can look at it. You see the first one on there? If you want to be in front of that, here's the person to talk to. If you can get them to agree, then sure, yeah. And they couldn't say that that was wrong, and they often didn't bother having that conversation. And they might still try to go over my head, but it kind of set the tone that, frankly, it's not my call because you're not going to accept it if I make it. Right. But here's, it's up to you guys. And if you can have that struggle with that guy, then I'll listen to the result.
And the other thing that typically helped was it's a really advanced tool. Are you ready for this? A piece of yarn.
Yeah.
So you have your backlog on the wall and you put the piece of yarn at where the current sprint leaves off. Basically, if you have 10 cards going down the wall and your current sprint's going to deliver 3, the yarn goes under card number 3. And so when someone comes in with their Trump hammer and they decide that this card is going to go above everything else, you say that's fine. You put their card on top and move the string up one slot. And they say, all right, you need to talk to the person whose card just bumped to the next sprint and see what value is going to be missing from this current sprint that you just modified. And it seems to end a lot of those conversations quickly.
I'm skeptical based on what I saw of the premises in these people's heads that developers can always accept more work into the same unit of time. They'll just work harder. We'll squeeze them harder. They're not working that hard in the first place. So just add one more thing. It doesn't mean trading anything off. That was one of the fallacies that I ran into repeatedly. But if it does help, great. Maybe I should have tried something physical like that.
No, there are those misconceptions out there that, developers are padding, developers are not being honest about their estimates, developers are slacking. Hey, they're sitting at the keyboard. They're not even typing. What's going on?
So that was one of the things that
Right?
was in my experience report as well, is that the way that our XP practices evolved at this environment that we're talking about started from instant legacy code that I had inherited with tons of copying and pasting. But it was solving a real problem that hadn't been solved before, and they wanted to expand it considerably. And so my first order of business was making this testable so that I can test drive and increase coverage, because we're going to have to live with this for years. It's got security properties that are pretty sensitive, so we can't make a mistake. And there's no QA people. So the way it started was simple legacy code refactoring and getting TDD in place. And then we got to where we had something that looked sort of like a backlog, except there weren't really stories and there weren't any points, and there was no real rhyme or reason to it, and we didn't have any kind of iterations. And what we did get to, because of a story where I earned trust with the ops team, this is part of my experience report, we were able to get to where we had been delivering into production every 3 to 6 months, because there's always a huge gateway in big corporate environments between proposing something for production and having it accepted into production. It was a big involved process. And so we got from 3 to 6 months per release to every month, because the person who would make the go, no-go decision had paired with us on a new feature and had written it and had seen the side effect of the failing test cases in some other area of the code that was caught in dev before it was even committed. So he understood extremely well why what we were doing was so safe and why we could ship whenever we claimed we were ready to ship, which was all the time. And so we got to monthly releases, which is about as close to continuous delivery as you can get in an environment where your software runs on the Kerberos servers in a big corporate environment. So we were pretty proud of that. But observers looked sort of with mild interest that we were seeming to play this game where instead of having to write a fixed manifest of what's going to be in a release and then develop exactly what's in the manifest and then inevitably slip the schedule, but then put that in production exactly as it was stated, that's not the only way to do it. We were doing whatever's ready on Friday every month is going in Friday night that month. And so that was just kind of curious. Like, nobody wants to change what they're doing to work that way. It's just interesting to see that the rules permit playing in that way. But what really shifted their understanding was what you're talking about with predictability and all that, is that we got a huge project that we were required to deliver by a fixed date that was not up to us, and it was not up to us to accept or reject the project. It was our project. And that's when we got the Scrum basics. That's when we got a project backlog, because it was the only thing we were going to be working on for the 8 months. And we got points, and we got velocity, and we figured out pretty early on that it's possible. And when the velocity started to tank, we knew exactly who was the offender, and we went to bat against them. And we shipped with 5 minutes to spare on an 8-month project, knowing all along exactly where we were. And that started to get a lot more interest, because now we're playing the same game, apparently extremely well. And that's when people wanted to know more about, what is this TDD thing? What is this Scrum thing? Based on the fact that in a project scenario, which is a very common scenario in that kind of environment, apparently we could also bring it home in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting how success breeds that curiosity, which in my experience has transformed into trust. So eventually, in those scenarios, you end up with product owners and management who say, all right, they're consistently delivering. It's almost to the point to where they start trusting their estimates a little more, because they know that you're hitting a certain cadence, and some of the constraints magically disappear. It's an interesting phenomenon where people say, well, wait a minute. They were able to get through that without whatever constraints or whatever safety harness they've put around this process, and they were successful, they were safe, and it went live, and the world didn't end. And that, to some people, I think, is a huge eye-opener.
And that was one of the data points in my talk, is that we, in about 3.5 years of monthly releases, we had to roll back once, and that was due to poor management decisions prior to that we anticipated having a possible impact. And so we prepared by having a better rollback plan than normal, and we wound up needing it. And every other release that we put in every month was fine.
But at least you had the rollback that they could count on.
Exactly. You there, JB?
I am hoping. There we are.
There's JB.
All right.
Oh, you're not in Canada right now, are
Oh,
you?
no, I am. I'm in Vancouver.
Ah,
Wrong end.
Very nice. The wrong end.
Exactly. Yes, the wrong end. Say hello to Vancouver, everyone.
Well, JB, thanks for joining us on such short notice.
No problem. Glad I could do it.
Awesome to get to talk to you again. We've been talking about the silos that people build and reaching across organizations and some experiences with that. Covered a little bit about Agile Roots, and Amitai went through the problem-solving leadership class with Esther Derby and Jerry Weinberg. Are you familiar with this?
I'm familiar with PSL, but I've never done it. I went to the Amplifying Your Effectiveness conference 3 years about, I guess, a long time ago by now. But so I got to have the experience. It's the only conference I've ever been to where the rule of thumb seemed to be that if you didn't cry at least once during the conference, then you weren't really participating.
Yikes!
Yeah,
there was some crying at PSL.
It was an emotional, draining. It's probably the hardest introspection I've ever allowed myself to do with other people present.
It seems like you're just tearing yourself open emotionally and just letting all that flow out.
There was some of that. Added to that was Jerry used to moderate a forum called SHAPE, which, if I remember correctly, was Software as a Human Activity Practiced Effectively. And so it felt a little bit like an extension of the conference of PSL, of sort of his community. And so at the end of the AYE conference, he would have a SHAPE day where people would come who were members of the SHAPE forum and would just get together for the day and have a free flow exchange of ideas. And one of those times I asked what I thought was a rather innocent question, and Jerry looked right at me and said, "Well, I'm not interested in that question. I'm interested in the question behind the question." And it's no word of a lie that 15 minutes into that discussion, I was weeping openly. I don't know who it was that was there that was holding on to me for dear life, and it was one of those career and life-changing experiences I still can't believe I let myself go through, but it oddly enough was part of the fun. But at any rate, it sounded like the question about PSL was mere preamble to what you were going to say.
Oh, no, not at all. I just curious if you were familiar with it.
Yeah.
I think it was a great experience for Amitai. George Dinwiddie shared a little bit about it too on one of the past episodes, and it seems like everyone has a unique experience, but it always comes back to, at some level, being profound for people.
I was hoping to crack myself open in the way that you were saying you had. I guess things have been very comfortable for me for a while, and that makes me nervous when I'm willing to think about the fact that should make me nervous. And I was hoping to be uncomfortable and look my shortcomings in the eye, because I've got plenty of them. One of them is that I don't like to look at them. And
obviously it's not a bottleneck, man, so don't worry about it.
Well,
there you go.
Some of them I'm not sure about, but
it'll become urgent when it becomes urgent.
I feel like that's an enabling idea, and I don't need any enabling about it.
That's funny.
So
it seems like we're
in the next 8 minutes doing then. Is our goal to make sure that Amitai cries at some point during this show?
This office is empty. There's nobody here to hug. I'm in trouble if I haven't.
Oh.
Challenge accepted.
All right.
Just don't electrocute yourself on the microphone. You'll be fine.
I think we've all had those moments in the office where you just have that mind-altering or that change in mindset, and those are special. And I wouldn't trade them for the world. I mean, you walk away from thinking, I can't believe I just did that. But yeah, I think those are great. And if you haven't had one, I think, JB, it's kind of back to your comment about the Amplify Your Effectiveness conference. If you haven't had one of those, maybe you're not engaged enough.
Yeah, it really, I wasn't prepared for it. I don't think I've ever, as high trust an environment with like more than 3 people, none of whom were related to me, as I experienced at the 3 years that I went to that event, which made it even worth, going to Phoenix for it.
So I'll tell you what, there's a topic that Amitai teed up, and it's one that I I have no experience with, but I'm very much interested in. And JB, I wonder if you've got some insights into this mob programming.
Yes, a little bit.
As it turns out, we have mob together online.
Yes.
Online mobbing.
My most recent mobbing experience was with Ruby Steps.
So for the listeners who aren't familiar with that, can you talk about Ruby Steps just real quick?
Yeah, so Ruby Steps is the brainchild of my good buddy Pat Maddox. And it's sort of his answer to the question, I think I want to be a Ruby programmer. I've read a little bit of introductory material on how to program in Ruby. What do I do now? And that was, he decided that he wanted to figure out if he could run an ethical Ruby programmer factory. And so it seems like that's what he's trying to do. And so he, as part of the program, one of the first things he started to do was to create space for a handful of people to program together in the what seems to be the Woody Zool mob programming format, which is a lot different from what I remember when we first started to talk about pair programming with n greater than 2 15 years ago. We didn't have the good sense to give it a good marketing name, but we always thought, well, if pair programming is good, then what happens if there's more than 2 people? We kind of thought, well, more than 2 people and people start getting in the way, and there's somebody who kind of gets a little bit pushed off to the side, because we sort of had in mind 3, but we never really thought about 6 or 8. And so this resurgence of mob programming is kind of interesting. It seems like it really shouldn't work, but if learning truly is the bottleneck, then mob programming will accelerate the team converging towards working together in a way that nothing else does. I shouldn't say nothing else. I mean, there's probably something better, but
gotta be.
Well, yeah, exactly. By definition, there has to be. But yeah, so
hashtag no anything else.
Oh no, not another hashtag.
Stop it, or I'll bury you alive in a box.
Well, so what you're saying about mobbing as a learning tool, I have just started an experiment with the team that I'm coaching at this client. They have a lot of needs. It's not only TDD and other craftsmanship practices that they need. There's more basic stuff going on too, and there's been a lot of changes to the membership of the team. So it seems like a prime opportunity to reformulate how they fit together and how they work together, and everybody needs to learn something about the system they work on, me included. And so as of last week, it's been a week now, we're doing an experiment with mob programming. What was surprising for me was that when I went to the team Scrum Master in advance of this and said, what do you think? My read is that they have enough trust and they have enough problems, and this might be worth an experiment. And his response, I thought I was going to need to persuade him. He said, no, we worked that way in the 90s on a small talk project. When there was a bug, we would all 10 of us would get together and do it. Yeah, it sounds great. Let's do it.
It all comes back to small talk. Isn't that funny?
Well,
that's great. Kent Beck is...
If it doesn't come back to small talk, it comes back to, well, that's the way we used to do it before...
Exactly.
Before someone in the early 80s decided that somehow programming was just about writing code and then letting somebody else figure out if it worked and letting someone else figure out what we're supposed to build, as opposed to, the stories I hear about programmers in the 60s and 70s who did it all themselves. And so they had to know how to do everything. They had to know how they were the first generalizing specialists. And they did it all. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there at the time, obviously, so I don't know why it came to be that way, but I'm just so happy that it took only 20 years to rediscover how to do things sensibly instead of the, hundreds of years it usually takes to, uncover or rediscover ancient wisdom.
So the dark ages passed quickly and now we can get back to good work, right?
Yes, I suppose so. I remember distinctly there was a dude, I wish I could remember his last name, Brian something. He this was back at the very dawn of the XP Toronto user group. So this would have been 2000, I guess, 2001. And I remember talking to him at length. He was the guy who told me that if he were Kent Beck, he would have called it humane programming instead of extreme programming. And we had long discussions about what would pair work be like if n was greater than 2. What if it was actually more than 2 people working on problems at the same time? And it started with discussions about programming, but it went on to discussions about modeling and planning and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of seemed like an obvious thing. And I never had the opportunity to do any of this stuff because, by that point, either I was working at IBM and was stuck doing work on my own, or I was out working as a technology trainer and, everything I did was in an artificial classroom environment, so nobody ever took any of it seriously. 2000 and I want to say 5, I think. I was at a conference. I don't even remember which one. And I ended up chatting with Ward Cunningham and Elizabeth Hendrickson, and then we just said, well, let's look at the code. And so it was this really strange situation where Ward was sitting in front of me on my left, and Elizabeth was sitting in front of me on my right, and I was sitting behind them in between them. And we weren't quite mobbing, but what was happening was Ward and Elizabeth were pairing a little bit. I was pairing with Ward, talking more about design issues, and Elizabeth and I were pairing, talking more about testing issues. And I was sort of playing the role of the part-time programmer, part-time tester. And so I would, Ward would say something and we would talk about it a little bit, and then he would start typing, and then I would turn and talk to Elizabeth and we would talk a little bit about how we were going to test it. And then that gave us the feedback gave us the idea of what to do next. And then Ward and I would talk about how to build it. And it kind of went back and forth like that. So it was almost like I was playing a dual role, even though I never touched the keyboard. At no point did I actually lean forward to type anything in, because whatever I was able to say to Ward, I was able to express myself well enough that he and I understood what each of us were saying, and he could type it in. And then Elizabeth and I were talking back and forth, and we had sort of an idea. And this was amazing for me because I was learning both about programming and about testing at the same time, just sitting and doing something more active than listening to them, but less active than mobbing, the way that people seem to be talking about doing it now. And that was an interesting experience to me. That was the first time I ever really did something that was like pairing, but with more than 2 people. I always thought that was neat. I learned a whole lot. I don't know whether they learned anything from me, but it certainly seemed like it accelerated my learning in the 30 minutes we did it. And I thought, if I worked like that 4 or 5 hours a day, I'd be a genius in 3 weeks.
Well, how could you ever have a junior programmer after a few months?
Right.
I mean, it would just be phenomenal. And you could actually take a vacation.
Yes. Well, that was, oh man. The very first pair programming session I was ever in at a conference was with Lori Williams, and she asked, "Why are you guys interested in pairing?" And I just immediately threw my hand up and said, "I want to get sick. I want to go home. I want to be on vacation."
Yeah, it's amazing when you spread knowledge that you can actually take a week off of work and not carry a cell phone or a laptop. It's just funny how that works out.
Absolutely.
I can see why if that's how you did n equals 3. That thinking about n equals 6 or 8 would be prohibitive.
Right. So it never occurred to me. I mean, I'd seen carousel programming before. So we would essentially do ping-ponging with 3 people, and then the chairs would just rotate in a circle, right? I guess that's mobbing. I just didn't realize at the time that, really the difference between that and what Woody calls mobbing now, what sort of is becoming known as mob programming, is that instead of doing it with instead of rotating based on a timer, we rotated based on red, green, red, green, red, green. So it was ping-ponging with 3. And of course, we sort of, we got the idea. Well, you could ping-pong with 4. Hell, you could ping-pong with 12 if you really wanted to. It just kind of seemed like the kind of thing nobody would volunteer to try to do. Like, it just seemed like it would be too weird for anybody to try.
Initially, it just feels like the larger group, it would turn into spectator programming.
Right.
So you have a lot of disengaged people perhaps paying attention and maybe 2 or 3 actually working. But I think he's got a model around it where he has large groups engaged. And I think there's a few videos out there that I've watched where it is fascinating to watch. Now, the person, what I want to see is the video where they're working in that manner and the client paying the bill walks in and sees that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see that reaction. It's like, so which one of these people am I paying right now? And it's all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just one keyboard. That's the discussion I want to see play out, because I believe in the pairing, and I think that the 3 is interesting, especially as, JB, you were talking, you're the conduit between development and test.
Right.
And that's a fascinating position because you're able to speak to both sides, and you're learning both sides, and you're connecting 2 people that may not have connected, and that's easy value to discuss and share. 10 people standing around a monitor or a projector on the wall watching two people code, that's trickier.
Right, and that's the thing that I haven't had the direct experience of doing that in an industrial setting. I mean, one of the downsides to the kind of work that I do is that a lot of it really does happen in an artificial learning environment. People know that I'm there for a short period of time. They have this picture in their head that they're supposed to squeeze as much new information out of me as possible. And so the idea of having 6 people sitting around a projector in a room, that's okay, because that's not that much different from having 20 people sitting in a classroom style setup, all facing forward watching me lecture with, presentation slides, which I don't do anymore. But it's a lot easier to sell that when people are in the mood of thinking of it as training. What I find strange, not strange necessarily, but what I find maybe a bit unfortunate is that companies are perfectly happy to spend some multiple of $10,000 to bring in an expert for a limited amount of time to do training, but that they're not willing to do that same kind of training with their people on a regular basis and not have to pay the expert a multiple of $10,000 to be there. I mean, just, if your team costs you, I don't know, $2,000 a day, then that team can sit and mob for 2 solid weeks, 8 hours a day, for the same as it would cost to bring a trainer in for 3 days and pay them $20,000 in addition to your people being in the classroom.
Right.
So it seems kind of like, at least at that level, it's kind of a no-brainer to me. And then if it turns out that after 2 weeks the team is so much, that knowledge on the team is so much better distributed after 2 weeks, then it seems like a pretty obvious investment to me. But again, it's just so much easier to see that there's a teacher and a classroom and a curriculum, and that looks more like learning than 6 people sitting around a projector. 4 of them are scratching their heads trying to figure out what's going on. It's not obvious who the teacher is. We agree, the 3 of us might agree, that that's perhaps equally and maybe even more effective, but it just doesn't look like it. And I don't know how to make it look like it. I don't know how to change that point of view. It's a clash of worldviews.
I think the thing that works, based on what I've seen where I am, we're not the first team to try mobbing. I actually saw another team across the building do it, and that's what gave me the idea to try it here. What I heard from them was they went to program management and said, we want to try this new way of working. We're already kind of standing around a high top doing design together. What if we just moved over to a computer and continued? Maybe what's going to happen this iteration is that we get one story done. Maybe. So what wound up happening is that the one story that was actually pretty complicated, which made it a good choice for mobbing, they got it done in 2 or 3 days. They got 5 or 6 more stories done at the end of the iteration. It was pretty much just as good as it had been before, and then they were better after. So if you can wait 2 weeks to see what happens with the experiment, it might already be obvious that it's valuable. And that's just in terms of delivery, never mind the learning. The learning is visible.
So I think you guys just knocked out the economics behind mob programming, right? So if you have a fixed run rate on your team and you calculate it over 2 weeks and you get basically the ability to run that experiment, and let's say you get 2 or 3 sprints. So you have a 2 to 6 week investment with a known run rate, and you can see very quickly, forgive me for using a dirty word called velocity, right? But if you can look at velocity, you can look at delivery, you can look at all these different things and decide, all right, did we improve or not?
Exactly.
And if you did, what a great investment.
Right.
And so if your velocity wasn't impacted negatively and the whole team is mobbing and quality either improved or stayed the same, but learning increased, why wouldn't it be a great experiment?
Right. Don't come in this room while we're mobbing if you're going to have an opinion about it. Wait till the iteration is over, see what your opinion is.
So, and it's back to, and we talked about this last time, JB, it's the manifesto covers this. Working software is our only measure. I mean, that's what we value. And so any other consideration around, all right, so if they're mobbing, that must be bad. So work individually. Well, wait, the delivery was good. The working software is there, and it's no less than what we were doing prior to this experiment. So why would we even look at that?
Right, and in fact, it's funny. One of the it just strikes me as you were saying that one of the documents that somehow has been lost to history, maybe even a more important document than the Agile Manifesto, was the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities that went along with it. And in the center of that was business people make business decisions and technical people make technical decisions, and technical people don't make business decisions and business people don't make technical decisions. Somebody walks in and sees us mobbing. If they're doubtful about the results, that's okay, as long as they're willing to say, all right, you've got a month, and if the results are terrible, I'm going to tell you to stop. But at least let us screw up before you tell us we've screwed up. Let us fail before you tell us to do something else.
Do we get to self-organize or do we not get to self-organize?
And that's where, exactly, that's the question. Are we self-organizing or not? And if we're not, then let's drop some other illusions as well.
Oh, I'm totally with you there. I mean, it's especially pernicious for me to see these kinds of dynamics play out in environments where decision makers have at least made a show of delegating some stuff to the teams through saying we're going to go agile. I mean, there's an implication here that you're going to be delegating decision making down. That's in the kit. That's in the toolkit. The more formalized approach to delegation that Management 3.0 teaches, I think it could be helpful here to have a discussion about what aspects of the way we build software, what kinds of decisions, what's the degree of delegation down to the team. That could lead to some interesting discussions and could help us figure out that there might be fertile ground to try mobbing or that it's a non-starter. But then if somebody says, no, you're not allowed to try that, then you can point to the delegation scale and say, okay, well, what has to happen for us to be able to move up the delegation scale to the point where you then trust us to organize ourselves as opposed to directing our work? Again, we're back to clash of worldviews. Either the decision makers agree that a pull system leads to better throughput or they don't. You can bash them over the head with copies of the goal until they're bloody, but at some point, either they believe that pull systems create better throughput or they don't. And if they do, then they don't care. They shouldn't care whether we're mobbing or not.
I have a copy of that book in my desk waiting for someone to be susceptible to it. I'm ready.
I thought you were going to say waiting to beat somebody with it.
I don't think it works that way. That's a push system.
I have a bloodied copy of it sitting right here. It amazes me that there are people who think that they're justified in that level of control over how individuals do their work. I mean,
and to be fair, I've also seen tech leads. So you have developer on developer times as well, where does the curly bracket go? Where does the semicolon belong? How many tabs or spaces? Even to that minutia.
This yet? Come on. Doesn't IDE just have the magic reformat according to Julie's preferences feature? Where is that?
Yeah, it is interesting. And the idea around self-organization, I don't think it's always clear to people that that's what they're signing up for. That a team could go from, we're going to self-organize and we're going to pull our own tasks and it's all going to be right and good to, hey, we're working as a mob now.
Right.
And that's a jump that I think it's an eye-opening experience for those who have agreed to self-organization, but it's also an interesting experiment that if you deny, you're giving up an ability to optimize the throughput of your team. And that's a hard concept until you let a team do it. Maybe we should tag self-organization with being open to experimentation and make sure that's so not implicitly but explicitly clear when these things come up.
Well, I think self-organization, I think, at least deals with both experimentation and delegating decision-making down.
It's constant experimentation, right?
If you stick together long enough, the amount of experimentation probably goes down over time. Maybe.
That makes sense.
The changing the meaning of standard work. That standard work stops being about standard steps of work, moves towards standard of work, as in our standards of work, and that we adopt a much more fluid way of working where we sort of become like proficient practitioners on the Dreyfus scale. We just sort of, we figure out what needs to be done and we figure out how to do it, and then we just do the right thing, as opposed to following a program or following a set of rules or any of that kind of stuff. That we just sort of, we end up in the right place at the right time doing the thing that needs to be done, figuring out what needs to happen to make that happen.
That's what I've been doing with the team that I'm mobbing with, is that if you were to bring in Woody and say, does this look like what you think of as disciplined mob programming? It doesn't. We're still figuring out how to do it. And so I have to kind of bite my tongue and say, this isn't what I think, a high functioning experienced team looks like, but they're figuring out what they can figure out as they figure it out. And so my job is to let them be engaged as they are, which is itself special to watch, and pick one thing at a time if I want to suggest and coach them that seems like the next thing they should work on if they haven't already figured out what it is. And they're doing some of that. So like I could come in there and say, no, mob programming is where there's one person at the keyboard and you rotate and there's got to be testing. We're not doing anything like the testing I want to be doing. I just have to hold on, take a breath, let them learn the way they're learning, because they are learning and they're learning very fast.
I imagine it's hard not to look at those folks, see how they're progressing, and then not get excited about where they can go next and saying, now try this, now try this, now try this. And then you turn on the fire hose of ideas and drown them. And it must be really hard. You really do have to step back and say, rather than getting overly excited here, I can be a source of ideas about what they could do next. And when they look at each other and say, geez, we don't know what to try next, that's the time that I can speak up. And how oddly satisfying it'll be to go a year and not have made a suggestion.
Someday. Yeah, what I do with the extra energy is that I step out of the room and find some other coaches, and we just kind of, whoa, this is amazing. That's what happens. Try to keep it out of the room with the team.
It's a shame that I don't take the time to see more of that stuff happen outside of an artificial learning environment. But at least I get to see it in training environments to a certain extent.
It's a joyful moment. It's one of those where you just step back and you take a deep amount of satisfaction in a moment that you helped foster. I look at it, when my kids learn something, I look at it as the same way. There's just something deeply satisfying about not even necessarily creating that moment, just getting to experience and witness it.
Yes.
That's exactly right. I've been with this team for months, and I wasn't sure exactly how I can make a big impact. Like, where is the lever here that I can pull? As of a week ago, I know that I found it. It is definitely a joyful moment.
Well, I have to say I'm happy for you, and I'm non-trivially jealous. To coming back a little bit to the whole, the image of somebody looking at like a stakeholder looking at us mobbing and thinking, what am I paying for? I go back to Arlo Belshie's paper, Promiscuous Pairing: A Beginner's Mind. And granted, that was just an experience report, and it's not, it's not scientific research by any standard. But, assuming that it has application outside his team, that's the key result there was switching pairs every 90 minutes, and the least qualified implementer stays. So whoever of the two feels less confident that they know what to do next is the one that should stay with that task, and the other person leaves. It seems to me that mob programming is just taking that same idea and ratcheting the frequency at which you change pairs. That's really all it is. It generates different behaviors, but structurally that's the big difference. It's not that much different from going from waterfall to agile by just saying, well, we're going to increase the number of iterations. We're going to increase the frequency of iterations, and that changes how long we get to work on any one particular phase, and then we find out that phases themselves, in fact, are uncomfortable at this speed, and so then we have to do something different. Instead of pairing with 4 different people in a day, I'm pairing with 4 different people all the time, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. And again, you look at that, and if you genuinely believe that learning is the bottleneck in product development, then you look at that and think, of course. And if you don't genuinely believe that learning is the bottleneck in product development, then you look at that and think, oh my God, what are they doing? I can see my money flying out the window.
You have to live it to believe it. And I think when you have management who started as a programmer and then had some success at that and then came up through the ranks, there's more openness to this idea. And when you have an MBA who's never actually written or who's never fired up Eclipse and used JUnit and had to do all these different things, all of a sudden you don't have the empathy, you don't have the experience, and and your devs are just a commodity.
Yeah,
so
that simple.
I wonder too, almost at a core level. So when I would pair program as a developer a number of years ago, it always felt like, especially on tasks that we were unsure about, which were always the most fun, right? We're not sure how to do this. We're writing the tests aren't probing it well. It always felt like, you're walking into the dark forest in the fairy tale, and if you had to do it alone, there's no way to do it.
Right.
But you have your friend with you, and all of a sudden it's, all right, let's tackle this. And I think just at that core level, that camaraderie of tackling a difficult task makes people faster. And you can't understand that until you've been in that situation.
And even if it doesn't make you more than twice as fast as you would be if you worked alone, it still results in more stuff done sooner. And that's another, then that gets to the whole sooner and faster thing that it's, I don't actually care about being able to go through all the steps at a higher speed. I care about shortening the length of time between when I start and when I stop as measured by the calendar or the clock. Yes, there are some things where it's better to go faster more often than not. I mean, the fact that I type at a high speed helps me more often than it hurts me, although it does occasionally let me get into trouble at a faster pace. Just again, the idea that eliminating wasteful steps saves us more than going faster does.
Right. How much can we not do?
Yeah, and part of that is not just how much can we not do in terms of how much can we. A mistake always costs more than doing it correctly slowly seems to do. The mistakes hurt more. It costs more to make a mistake than it does to go slower but sure.
Yeah, escape defects, they're so much harder to fix later.
Yeah.
And it costs more. Now you're adding a phase and you have a run cost that's taking you well past a budget, or deliver sooner, not faster with a pair, or with 3 or 4 or 5 with a higher quality. It's also that joint responsibility.
Yes.
We're all going to make sure that we're delivering something that's of high quality, no matter who's at the keyboard, because we're mob programming and all of our names are on this.
So this is exactly what came out of the workshop that Lisa and I did at Agile Roots. First of all, the artificial constraint on dev and ops working separately turns out to be a really realistic one, but still stupid. And then working together, you can share the information and the knowledge and get where you're going. And the really interesting piece of feedback that we got, which I don't think I got to mention earlier, was from someone in the audience who said that it would be great if we could get managers and executives to go to a workshop like this, first to experience what the work is really like, as artificial as it was, but a development step and a production step and a development step and a production step, really basic stuff, but just experience what it's like to have a bug and where that bug came from. And what was the gap in the thought process or the problem-solving process that permitted it to occur? And what was it like to be the person that did that? And what was it like to be the other person who was apparently responsible for that? And what if you didn't work that way? Just to have firsthand experience. I hadn't thought of that at all. I was very surprised when that was the feedback, that it would be great if we could bring some execs in to do a workshop like this. So maybe that's the answer to our worldview problem, is that the right workshop, if we could somehow manage to get it in front of the right people, would give them, an analogous experience that they then could see what we mean by learning is the bottleneck.
Who takes a job because somewhere in the interview process they learn that the senior VP of development has read the goal and believes it? That to me now sounds like a standard. When the interviewer turns to you and asks, "Do you have any questions for us?" Is there any gold rat on the bookshelves of your senior management? Have they read it? What are the last 3 books the director of development read? I'd really like to know that. That gives me a clue when there's a chance that things might actually happen here.
When I interview, I actually look at the bookshelves of all the offices, or in all the offices that I go to, and I do see the books on the shelves, and I do actually make a quick judgment based on the literature that's there. And it is an interesting trick that has served me pretty well. I've been able to assess a few times correctly that, wow, these are miserable waterfall books. I need to get out of here. And in some cases, it just led me to believe that while the processes I may not agree with, the management was open-minded.
Right.
And that has worked out very well too. But yeah, the books on the shelf are critically important. Snooping in bookshelves has served me well over a number of years now. I think that the next generation is ready for a refreshed view of XP.
Yeah, I think it's ready. I think it's ready for a resurgence.
The philosophy, not the code. I think the coding is important, but actually getting this new generation of developer up to speed with what Kent and Ward and Ron Jeffries and a number of others, and you yourself, JB, you were a huge part of that movement, even though you stay modest and humble about it. I think the stuff that you guys laid out back in around 2000, 2001, 2002, when that was really emerging, or even prior to that with the small talk stuff, these ideas are new to these kids that are taking programming jobs now. And I think they need or would find useful the new version of that.
Well, and if we just kind of positioned it as hipster programming, maybe it would, maybe put some play, because it kind of is, right? I love Merrick's take on the whole thing about the whole
anarcho-syndicalist.
Cross retrofuturism. It's artisanal programming. It's all those things that, I have to say, if there's one thing that you could say about the extreme programming community as part of the software community, is that we were hipsters before it was cool to be a hipster.
Yeah.
There's something oddly, perversely satisfying about that. But not only that, I mean, I like that we're finally raising a generation of people who demand humanity in their work.
Yes, that's what I love about them.
People didn't think they had the right to demand humanity in their work 20 years ago.
You can play into the hipsters' hands because they already appreciate the virtues of small batch anything.
Right.
So we can build on that.
Absolutely. I mean,
you mean like small batch beer,
for example, right?
The coffee shop right outside the hotel here, which has the delightful name Breaking Bean, and they actually do have, which I'm sure is a copyright infringing parody of the Breaking Bad logo.
Has to be.
It's a Japanese style coffee shop, which I'd never been in before, but I'm in Vancouver, so what else are you going to have? And they have this beautiful row of siphon machines up on top of their case, and so you can have espresso or you can get siphon coffee, and just the whole ritual of spending the 2.5 minutes watching the siphon brew my coffee was as much a part. Right, my one cup was as much the experience as drinking the result. And
artisanal coffee,
artisanal small batch coffee. So that's what we do, man. And we're all batch code. I should mention, since we're on this topic, that I do own the Twitter account XP Hipster, and it's so hipster that it hasn't tweeted. Because
Twitter isn't so cool anymore.
I'm ready for XP to make a comeback. When I go to XP days in Karlsruhe, Germany, later this year, my talk there is going to be about the resurgence of XP, the coming resurgence of XP, and maybe by then it'll be even deeper into it. I think it's happening. I think it's inevitable. The hard part is not to be one of the people in the crowd sitting in the corner saying, "What took you so long? I've been waiting here for 12 years for you to come back. Where have you been?" I prefer to think that I'm going to sit there with open arms saying, "I knew you were eventually going to find your way back. Welcome home." I'm always going to love the metaphor of etudes that the XP practices are exercises that help us develop dexterity and consistency,
Yes.
and high standards, and all those things all together exactly are a way to lead to a way to gain the trust of the business, so that they can then plan.
XP is a solution to the problem that businesses typically don't understand the shape of the cost curve of a software development project. They don't know, they don't see, they don't know how to see that it's going to curve upward unless they do specific things to keep it flatter. XP is those things.
And that's the brilliance behind what Kent Beck did, is that he flattened that cost curve almost to a pancake. And he demonstrated it convincingly through the literature. And for some reason, we've allowed that pancake to, like, it's crinkling up again. I wonder if it's just time to smash it. And I think he's retired now, but I think there's room to bring those thoughts back.
I'm very much looking forward to the resurgence of XP, and I think we're going to look back at this, and it'll be, the software community is happy to do what's effective once they've exhausted all the other alternatives.
Right.
And I think we've been exhausting all the other agile alternatives for the last 12, 15 years, and it'll be nice to hear people talk about the ideas, recapture names, prominent names that were otherwise consigned to relative obscurity, because we'll be reading their stuff again, and it'll be like, it'll be our renaissance, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to lie, with some smug satisfaction, and I make no apology for that, but also because there is some vindication that we weren't nuts, that we understood that this, we know that maybe we were a little overly proscriptive at times, but we weren't nuts, that these things are important, these things are essential, that technical excellence is a key ingredient, and that you got to do it. You've got to write tests, because that's 1 out of 1 million programmers is smart enough to write good code without tests, and maybe 1 out of 1 million programmers is smart enough to design complicated systems well without tests, without the feedback from tests. None of us is going to work with that person. Never. I mean, it's vanishingly small chance that we're going to get to work with that person.
I talked to that person at Agile Roots. I'm not sure that I believed what he was saying. I guess I would have needed to see what he's talking about. But he was saying he doesn't really like to pair anymore. He doesn't really like the test drive anymore. He has other ways of validating what he's doing. And then there's usually some infrastructure that does the checking that he'd be worried about.
Oh, wait, no, you're talking about anymore. I'm talking about never needed it. There's plenty of people who like I'm a much more effective programmer, even if you take tests away, than I was 15 years ago, in part because of a lot of the stuff that I learned with tests. I can do a lot of the test driving in my head now, but that's, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice and seeing the same patterns over and over again. And that's, that's the etudes thing. That's where that metaphor of etudes comes in. It's the equivalent of the finger exercises. And then when it's time to play that difficult passage, the fingers know what to do. A lot of the design work, a lot of the stuff that I do that looks like upfront design is really test driving really quickly in my head, only because I've test driven that kind of code 100 times before. Yeah.
So with that said, JB, any plugs or anything coming up that you'd like to let people know about that I can add to the show notes? And
well, so the European Tour 2015 is looks like it's going to be late October until Christmas-ish. So anyone in Europe who is interested in working with me, I've got some time in November, and so you can always go to jbrains.ca, and from there you can figure out how to get in touch with me and let me know. You can have me for the I'm already in Europe, you don't have to pay for the transatlantic flight price. And as always, online-training.jbrains.ca. So anybody who wants to either go through the world's best intro to test-driven development, or who wants the JBrains experience where you have me on your team as a very, very part-time member of your team for $27 a month. I'll answer your questions. I'm happy to have as many people who are willing to give that a shot. It's only, you're never going to get a consultant for $27 a month. Not going to happen.
Amplify, what do you got? What do you got going on?
First things first, my Agile Roots experience report, which was called Shoestring, Agility, and a Velcro Organization. I have the recording of the live performance. It's a little variable in sound quality because I just sort of set my phone to recording and then walked around. But you can make it out. I kind of evened it out on the levels. And there's some good stories in there, including some things that I talked about a little bit tonight. I loved Agile Roots so much that I want to tell everyone when it will be next year, because they know. It's going to be June 16th and 17th, 2016. The slides are all online. And finally, apropos of our discussion today about pairing and mobbing, I just released an episode of Agile in 3 minutes called Pair, which covers a lot of the things we talked about in 180 seconds or less.
And I'll jump in there and say, anybody who sends Amplify a few dollars, he'll then take that, he'll pool all that money together, and he'll go to speechpad.com, and he'll get that talk transcribed, and then you guys don't have to worry about the audio quality at all. So go find Amplify, figure out how to give him $5, and if 15 or 20 of you can do it, then he'll have enough money to get that stuff transcribed for you.
Very good.
But we also have to figure out ways to make sure speechpad.com gets money, because they do great work.
And I'm Ryan Ripley. Follow me on Twitter at Ryan Ripley. Check out agileanswerman.com for blog posts about many Agile topics, including some of the topics you heard about tonight, along with other podcast episodes that you can listen to. Or follow us on iTunes. Please subscribe to the show, leave us comments, feedback, reviews.